success itself brings joy, but actually the process of that success should be joyful as well. There's always going to be hard stuff, and there's always going to be the admin and the bureaucracy. There's easy ways to phrase language in the positive rather than the negative, whether it's giving people feedback, whether it's challenging an idea. So those were the sort of things we wanted to see. I think making sure you take the opportunities to challenge the status quo. For the things that, I always used to say to my teams, you tell me what getting in the way of you being better.
Welcome to JOY², Live with Joy. This is the podcast where we get to explore the power of joy, purpose, passion, and fun, and how joy, when practiced intentionally, transforms how we live, work, and lead. I'm your host, Greg De Koker, and I believe that when you live with joy, everything gets better, and I mean everything. And this isn't just about feeling good. It's about unlocking joy as a resource, one that fuels better leadership, meaningful work, and thriving lives. Each week, we share the stories, the insights, and the sparks that ignite more joy, because joy is contagious, it's powerful, and it belongs to all of us. So lean in, stay curious, and let's create more joy together. This is JOY², brought to you by Essentia Group. Welcome back to the JOY² podcast, where we explore the hidden power of joy in leadership, work, and life. I'm your host, Greg De Koker. And this podcast isn't about surface level happiness or motivational posters in the hallway. It's about joy as a strategic advantage, joy as fuel. Joy is something deeply human that shapes how we live, lead, build, and scale. And today's guest brings a fascinating lens to this conversation. Chris Barkey, who's here with me today, has enjoyed a significant career in engineering with extensive executive and board experience. Following 30 years with Rolls-Royce PLC, he reached the company executive as Group Director, Engineering and Technology. In this role, he was responsible for engineering across the entire company, covering a portfolio of civil aerospace, defense aerospace, marine, nuclear, and power systems businesses. In July 2018, Chris was appointed Interim CEO of the Henry Royce Institute, the UK National Institute for Advanced Material Science. In 2020, he joined Baker Hughes as Chief Technology Officer, where he was accountable for engineering, from technology to new product introduction and in-service support. Chris has held a multitude of board positions and is currently chairman of Capsol Technologies, a carbon capture company in Norway, and a non-executive director of ELE Advanced Technologies, a manufacturing company in the UK. Chris has an honors degree in mechanical engineering from Leicester University and an MBA with distinction from Loughborough University Business School. He is a chartered engineer and was elected to the Fellowship of the Royal Academy of Engineering in 2017, the Royal Aeronautical Society in 2016, and the Institute of Mechanical Engineers in 2000. Chris is also married with 3 children. I'm not sure when you found time for that, but that's also amazing. Bit of a show off with 3 kids, by the way, but we'll get into that. And perhaps most importantly, Chris is someone I've really enjoyed getting to know beyond the titles. So Chris, welcome to JOY². It's so great to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Thanks, Greg. Pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to it.
So in our last conversation, the one thing that struck me the most wasn't just your incredible experience and your 30 years at one of the most prestigious brands in the world, Rolls-Royce. It was your thoughtfulness, your humility, and your calmness. So you've had a front row seat to extraordinary innovation and extreme responsibility over the course of your career. So I'd love to start simply by asking you, when you hear the phrase joy in leadership, what comes to mind for you?
I guess there's 2 perspectives. One is the kind of the giving and the receiving, and one is, as a leader, how do you instill joy into, the organization and the people around you, and that's about, setting the right environment, making sure that people understand what the behavioral standards are, and in particular that you model those behavior standards, because as we all know, the shadow of the leader casts long and deep. So, if you're not modeling those behaviors, then who is? But I also think that kind of authenticity, sense of humor, we all do serious jobs, and that there's a time for absolute seriousness, but actually making sure that people have a release valve through humor is important. And setting the goals, putting the environment, allowing people to be the best version of themselves. When they come into work, which is actually what everyone wants to be, making sure they're safe. All leads to success. And I think success itself brings joy, but actually the process of that success should be joyful as well. There's always going to be hard stuff, and there's always going to be the admin and the bureaucracy, but actually in general, that brings joy. But probably when you mention joy in leadership, for me, actually, it's the receiving bit, which is maybe selfish, but the shared success of the teams
Mm,
that I'd led,
mhm.
which have been through my whole career, teams of amazing professional people with immense intellect, fabulous attitude, can do, backed up by, the theory and the science of engineering. But that shared success and the joy that comes from achieving things that are really, really hard to do. If you think of Rolls-Royce or Baker Hughes or the Henry Royce Institute, these are all incredibly complex things that there are very few people on the planet can do what those organizations do. So when actually you bring something to fruition, then that's joy in itself. But I always took joy from two other key things. One was that the team buzz, the team dynamic. And if people often ask me, how were you successful and how did you build your career? And I built my career on the back of some very talented people, as back to making sure they had the environment, but then kind of get out of their way and let them succeed. But make sure that you address issues when they arise, address conflicts when they arise, but make sure that there's a buzz and a dynamic that we celebrate those small wins and we celebrate the big wins. And if there's something that's gone wrong, then we learn from it and pivot quickly. But I think one of the biggest joys of my career has always been watching individuals progress through their career who you've helped coach and mentor, and seeing those people then rise up through an organization themselves. It brings me the biggest joy. So there's those product successes, those customer successes, and they're very real. But actually, the people development side of it is something that I always cherish and has always brought me, happiness and joy. Yeah.
I love that, and I love how you talk about it being intentional. I mean, you use the word, like, joy being part of the process, and I think that's one of the big misconceptions when you think about joy. We don't really use that term a lot in business, so I'm trying to bring it back, and I appreciate, you're helping to
That's
bring
right.
it in. Yeah, exactly, and I think there's something really special about thinking about it in terms of not just a result or a reward, right? After hitting the metrics, after someone, hitting a career milestone, nothing wrong with that, but really thinking about it as being intentional and how we lead, and how we live and how we work and really changing the conversation. I think as we both know, there's so many people that aren't happy with their jobs. And I had someone ask me after I'd presented, they said, was a senior mining level executive, and he said, "Greg, I love the old concept leading for joy. I love your energy. I believe in all this, but how am I supposed to talk to my guys on the front line, literally miners, on about joy?" And I said, "Wow, that's a great question." I said, "Well, one, maybe it's not using the word, like if that's already putting up, like kind of barriers or whatever. But I said, I think you can kind of boil it down, or at least one way to boil it down is certainly, do you care about your team? Do you truly care about them?" And then do they know you truly care about them? Can you actually go up to one of your team members and say, "Do you enjoy your job? Do you enjoy coming to work? Do you look forward to it? Do you enjoy being here?" That's a huge question. And research has shown that if you haven't built up that level of trust in your relationship with that person, they don't want to give you the honest answer if they don't enjoy what they do. Because it's like, why would a leader want to keep an employee who's miserable? Right? So I think it's looking at it a different way. What can the leader do to change the environment so they're not miserable, right? So they look forward to coming to work. And then one other thing that popped into my head, when you're sharing, was I've asked a lot of senior level executives, and I can't remember if we chatted about this the last time we spoke. Like, what would the typical senior level executive think if they heard laughter in the hallway from their team, from a team, their team? And it's an interesting question, right? The typical, and I'm saying the typical, right?
I think it's changed through my career. I'm kind of year 40. getting close to year 40 of the career. So, yeah, the dynamic has definitely changed. Certainly when I started, anything that wasn't seriousness, laughter was just being frivolous and people were time wasting. And I think you can find elements of that today. But I think we talked and I've been through a couple of quite major culture change programs in both
Uh-huh.
Rolls-Royce and in Baker Hughes. And I think probably at the start of those programs, laughter was maybe frowned upon.
Yeah.
But back to your bit, telling people you need to be joyful as an objective is quite hard. So don't write it down and don't tell people that that's what you
No.
expect. When we went through one of our programs at Rolls-Royce, which was called High Performance Culture, which is based
Mm.
out of Larry Sen, his kind of
Right.
cultural teachings. And it's stayed with me through most of my career, those teachings. And one of the core principles is kind of purposeful leadership. And so, what do you actually want to see and what are the from tos? And and we wrote down actually some of the things that we wanted to see and hear. But the one thing that we didn't do was tell people what those things were because it felt like slightly disingenuous as, we want you to laugh and, we want you
Like
to be
leading the
happy and joyful.
witness, so to speak, right? It's like leading the
Yeah,
witness a little.
exactly. So we kind of clustered it in four buckets. We said, yes, that we need to have a positive buzz. If you think of most high performing businesses, high performing teams, whether it be sport or in any field, actually there tends to be a positive buzz that is characterized by, kind of a bit of celebration of success. Yes, a bit of laughter at the right point in time. People just kind of get on with it. It's a slightly spontaneous feel and you have really well informed people because the communication's a lot better. I think there was a kind of a category of we want to see people stepping up, that they take more ownership, that again, the Larry Sen kind of concept is the accountability ladder. You can either I'm going to raise the problem and I'll let someone else sort it out, or actually people step up. I'm going to take it on. I'm going to take the action, even though I'm at 110% already. I'm going to do it. But also ask for help. And I think that's really important. If you're struggling and if you are miserable, then ask for help. But it's also in behaviors like, yeah, I want to see people speaking positively. There's easy ways to phrase language in the positive rather than the negative, whether it's giving people feedback, whether it's challenging an idea, so those were the sort of things we wanted to see. We were obviously one team, so collaboration, alignment, a level of agility and people understanding that everybody needs to win rather than just one bit of the team winning and the other bit losing. A,
Right.
a shared win is much more powerful. And then that kind of always better. So are you seeing people challenging the status quo and, looking for those small incremental improvements that just make everything better? And there's lots of theory about lean and Kaizen and everything else. But, if you just make every one little thing better every day,
Mhm.
then, in 3-4 months, the world's a different place. It's like watching, kids grow every day. You don't really notice it every day, but if you haven't
Mhm.
seen someone's kids for 6 months, they change significantly. And I think, kind of corporate changes like that as well. If you're in the middle of it, you don't really notice it, but actually, if you come and go away and come back again, then you'll see a big change.
And you also mentioned, leading by example too, so tying it back into the parenting thing, I guess, as a leader, the "do what I say, not what I do" is not the most effective approach, you
Yes,
know? Yeah.
exactly.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend that if you're trying to transform, a lot of different people and change
Yeah.
the culture and the
And some
environment.
of Yeah, some of those kind of concepts, well, I think all of the concepts, I think there are
Uh-huh.
20 concepts that Larry Sen pushes, and the one at Baker Hughes was done by Abakin, and they had a similar the core of it is common sense, but actually it's just how it's framed. And Shadow of the Leader was very front and center, which is you will lose the entire population of your organization if you tell people to do one thing and then you do exactly the opposite.
Yeah,
It's
that's right.
again, your kids won't follow you if you just go, "Don't do this," and then you just go and do it. So
No. They'll ignore you, not just because 'cause they're teenagers. They won't just ignore us because 'cause they're teenagers,
Well,
right? It's
that's another concept called gravity. There's some things you just can't change.
that's right.
Teenagers ignoring their parents is part of it.
Oh my god, that's great. Well, Chris, you've led, like, incredibly complex, high stakes, high profile engineering organizations. So, before we kinda continue talking about teams and scale, like, I'm curious about you and what do you do to cultivate joy personally?
It's great. It's a great question. I think professionally and personally, there's kind of it's a Venn diagram of the bit in the middle, which is I get joy from kind of purpose. I get joy from shared experiences, and I get joy from doing things that I love to do. So, some people love to do one thing and other people love to do other things. So there's no kind of answer to the question. But
Right.
I do like that shared experience, the kind of the personal interaction with people, whether that's, family, obviously family, but a very broad selection of friends. I've lived in Canada, I lived in the UK, I've worked all over the world, so I've got friends in a lot of places, and trying to keep up with them and connect. And whenever we're traveling, we try and meet up with people. I love to hike. Yeah, I like the
Mhm.
outdoors. We love to ski. Uh, I, I, I'm probably less of a foodie than my wife and a lot of my friends, but I do love good food with friends. So kind of, I'm active. Try to stay active. Harder as you get older and the body starts to creak, but those activities bring me joy. And obviously with friends and family, and the three kids and two grandkids as well now, two granddaughters, so those bring me joy. But the 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 bit that goes into it professionally is actually the same. So, shared experiences, doing things that I love with people who are really good to get on with, um, kind of marks my professional journey as well. So yes, worked incredibly hard, but actually had so much fun through the whole career. Um, and the other bit was purpose. So, one of the reasons I've stayed in engineering doing the sorts of things that we built was I love the the societal impact that you can have. I'm not moving money around. I'm not doing things that are ethereal. I can go to an airport and I look out onto the wing of an aircraft and there's an engine that I've worked on. I can drive past the power station. There's an engine that I've put in there. When we talk about climate change, whether it's carbon capture or things in hydrogen, I can see and touch and feel and smell the things that I and the teams that I've worked in, have brought to life and have supported through their life cycle. And they're real. If you look at the aerospace industry, it's bringing people on holiday, bringing people to weddings, the lifeblood of business. Defense of the realm is obviously unfortunately a hot topic at the moment.
Yes.
On the energy business, bringing the lights on,
Mhm.
and all of the climate tech I've been working on, that's the how big a societal impact do you want if you're working on stuff that's actually going to solve the climate change crisis? Because you're not going to do it by legislation and carbon credits. The only way to genuinely solve it is to bring technical solutions that are going to affect the things that we do to the planet. So
Hmm.
that purpose piece has been really important professionally, but also that, as you say, watching your family grow and mature and evolve is part of the purpose of my life as well. So,
I love that. Because when I was, checking you out on LinkedIn again, I noticed, you had a large team that you were leading at Rolls-Royce, over 17,000 engineers. And I was just like, it just sounds stressful. It sounds amazing. Like, to be able to do that in your career, right? It's amazing. And it's also like, it's like almost like mini panic attack. Like, you know, how do you, how do you do that and not kinda bring work home with you kinda consistently? Because you just seem so, grounded. I can't imagine. I'm sure there are times, obviously, you're stressed and you're upset and, we all make mistakes, but just generally speaking, your character is just as one of calmness and groundedness and, yeah, and joy, actually, for sure.
yeah. I mean, there's definitely there's absolutely periods of the career that I look back on strangely with some fondness, but incredibly stressful.
Mm,
Really, as you said, high stakes. A lot of what I worked on has been safety critical, so you
yeah.
have to make some quite difficult decisions. But actually, it's again shared experience time. You're surrounded by people who are you know international, if not world class in their field.
Uh-huh.
And my job certainly later in the career was to make sure that those large groups of people in organizations were glued together in a way that the end result was perfect. But actually, the talent and the raw energy and the hard work, came from the men and women in those organizations. That in some ways it's kind of easier sitting in the top. So I'm always or on the bottom. I'm certainly I'm one of the inverted leadership, kind of servant
Right.
leadership
I
disciples.
love it.
So, my job is
Mm,
kind of at the bottom to make sure that everyone above me can do their job properly. I kind of said it earlier that to the best of their abilities, and that's them feeling comfortable, whoever they are. So I've had a long career involved in DEI. I was executive sponsor of the LGBT group at Rolls-Royce. I was executive sponsor of the women's network at Baker Hughes. And I've obviously been involved in driving an increase in diversity in engineering, from almost day one in my career. So, that part was really important. And that then makes the stressful bit a lot easier, but it doesn't take the stress away. But I think some of that's personality. Having worked for so many companies, I've had so many personality profiles drawn about me, and if there's one kind of consistent act, they're all pretty consistent, but
mhm.
I don't get too high with the highs, and therefore I don't get too lows with the
Right.
lows. I'm reasonably, kind of the heart
Level-headed.
rate stays pretty pretty grounded. So
I want some of that. I had a coach once share with me that, he said ideally in life, as, typically sometimes our highs will kind of continue to get higher as we get to know ourselves and what we
yeah,
like and what we don't like, what we tolerate, what we don't tolerate. Ideally, it's like our highs continue to get a little higher and our lows continue to get higher as well for the same reason we know
yeah,
ourselves. So we're not letting ourselves drop down, so the gap is, and I think that's when, people have a really hard time is when your highs are up here and your lows are down here. That gap can be overwhelming. So sounds like you really manage the gap and, really well, which is awesome.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think the other point is kind of recognizing it.
Mm.
Need to be a little bit
Mhm.
self-aware. Again, apologies if I keep using some of the concepts, but
No, all good.
two of
Yeah.
the HPC concepts kind of high
Mhm.
performance culture concepts come to mind. One
Yep.
is called the kind of the mood elevator, which is,
Right.
so if you're kind of in a bad mood and, you're a bit slightly closed-minded, you might be feeling pessimistic and so on and so forth. And those are probably the times it's not your best place to make, really complex decisions because actually you're probably not going to listen to some really valuable advice from people. Whereas if you're high up the mood elevator and you're open-minded and you're optimistic and you're positive, then that brings a different vibe. So now you can't just go, "Oh, right at the bottom of the mood elevator. I can suddenly make myself, you know, feel happy." But actually, just thinking about it can probably get you a couple of rungs up the scale, if you like.
And
And the
even
other
acknowledge
one,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. Just
and
by acknowledging
acknowledging it,
it,
right? Yeah.
you kind of raise yourself up maybe one or two. You might not get
And
all the
even
way to
out
the top.
loud. Yeah, even with your if
Yeah,
you're with a team, even to say that, I think that, then everyone kinda knows where you're at. It's like a little check-in. You're kinda checking in where
yeah.
you're at emotionally, yeah.
And the other one is one around energy. So, yeah, we all
Mm.
bring an energy to every situation that we can. It can be positive energy, it can be negative energy.
Right.
And back to the shadow of the leader, I became aware through some of this culture change work that actually, even though I seem calm, I've had my moments, you know. So if I've had a really bad meeting with a customer and then I go into a meeting, completely different topic with a different team, if I come into the room and I kind of slam my book on the table and kind of sit back and say, right, let's get going. And, everyone senses that bad energy, and you've already killed the people who are stood up to ready present. They're all nervous, and they're already nervous because they're presenting to, somebody in a position.
Right.
So, so I took quite a lot of effort to kind of, and I had a physical reminder that I used to carry around with me to kind of recheck my energy
Mm,
before I went into a new situation. So, the people who were sat in the room, they had nothing to do with the bad experience I just had in my previous meeting, so they didn't need
right.
any negative energy. So I used to recheck my energy and, even in a meeting, if something was going badly, that, back to you don't need to be laughing, but what you don't need to be
Right.
is shouting and screaming. What you need
Right.
to be is calm and take input and make a decision, either individually or jointly, because there are some decisions you need to make as the leader, or there are
Mhm.
other decisions which actually, it's okay. We can make them as a team, or actually, you're the most skilled at doing this, so I'm delegating the decision to you, and I'll support you no matter what the decision is. So,
I love it. It's like taking responsibility for how you're being, because if you come in and you're
yeah,
being angry because of a previous meeting, like everything you're gonna say and do is gonna be a hint of anger, right? And, misdirected,
exactly,
for sure, because
exactly.
they didn't deserve that, as you said, they weren't part of that. So, I mean, that's great awareness, and I think, for people to when we realize those kind of things and do things about it, it's like celebrating the awareness, not using it as another reason to beat ourselves up, like, I slammed my book down or, I shouldn't have done that. It's really just being aware of that and doing something about it. So I love it. Well, Chris, you've overseen engineering, as we mentioned, across like many complex industries, high stakes, high profile. So where precision and performance are non-negotiable. Like you said, safety is a major
Yep.
issue. We're talking about human life. So I'm really curious about like what truly fuels high performing teams at that level.
There are the things around engineering, it's an experience-based science, if you like. So
Right.
there's the pure science, but then there's rules and guidelines that come from experience. So, there is a degree of compliance that we have to the rules of physics because they don't bend, so but actually so that bit's in some ways the easiest bit. The hardest bit of the high performance is the people. And I think it does come down to the behaviors, the individual behaviors, the behaviors within a team. So how do you interact with each other? And actually the behaviors between teams. Because actually there are very few big complex projects that you just do in one single team. You're reliant on a whole range of other teams. So I think, making sure that you've defined what the good behaviors are and
Hmm.
reinforce those. You kind of define what unacceptable behaviors are and be very clear that we're all, not just the leader, but everyone is going to do something about the inappropriate behavior.
Right.
And that just sets that sense the benchmark. And then you can overlay the things that are probably more obvious, like, what are the goals, set the goals, make sure that the plan is coherent and, stretch but realistic, make sure that you have the right environment. And I've talked about environment a lot, and that can be
Yeah.
a physical environment, a virtual environment, how when you get together as a team, what things that you need around you to make your job successful. But also then make sure you have the right governance structure and the right timings to celebrate the successes that you have, to understand and learn from things that maybe didn't go as well. But
Hmm.
it's all around that behavior set. And that's where those culture change programs that I've been involved with, and I was actually master culture change champion at Rolls-Royce. It
Amazing.
was, which is strange for an engineer because I'm a bit left brain, bit right brain. But it's so important and
Mhm.
that everyone understands what the rules of the games are and understands what the language is. So again, another of the Sen and Delaney principles of culture change is you've got to do it with kind of broad engagement with, I remember, with energy, momentum, and mass, which basically says Don't do it to a small group of people and then they have a kind of a new secret language with all these cultural concepts and no one knows what they're talking about. When he goes, well, where are you on the mood elevator? If people don't know what you're talking about, it actually does the exact opposite from what you want. So those programs were extremely aggressively pushed out through the organization at all
Mm,
levels. It started at the top, back to the shadow of the
mhm.
leader, because if the top didn't do it, then no one else would believe it. But actually, it rolled through the organization, both breadth and depth, as fast as was kind of humanly possible. So there was a lot of
Wow.
training, and it's an experiential training. So all
Right.
of the concepts kind of had some experiential stuff that went with it, which kind of grounded. But back to your
Mm.
earlier point on the mining,
Yes.
obviously one of the biggest areas with the how do we get this kind of in inverted commas soft and fluffy culture stuff out to the men and women on the shop floor, building
Right.
engines, manufacturing components, everything else. And actually, we did it the same. Took them through the same training. There was no different training, and tried to do it with mass and momentum. And it was hard. It was hard. It was harder.
Mhm.
There were some quite vociferous and visible detractors, but actually
Yes.
we worked hard, probably harder with the detractors, and turned a
Mm.
couple of the detractors into disciples. And then
Yes.
once you've done that, the rest of the organization goes with it.
Yeah.
So,
Amazing.
it is possible, and it waxes and wanes, and there'll be pockets where it was done really well and pockets where it was a lot harder, but in general, it went really well. So again, that kind of breadth and mass and momentum so that everyone talked the same language and everyone knew what the behavior set was supposed to be. That's a foundational piece for me.
I love that. So it's like as deep and as broad as you can go too. Like the experiential I love
Yeah,
because you're not going to learn how to swim, by reading it in a book. So you're not going to learn about behavior changes
exactly.
unless you're, doing it and sharing it, whether it's, through modeling, role modeling and all that. And you
Yeah,
you mentioned like the clear communication and really being clear, about the language you're using. So it doesn't sound like a little exclusive club that just has access to these concepts. And I love it. I've heard um some people have said expectations versus agreements is one of the biggest problems in personal and professional relationships. One of the biggest reasons for there being conflict. And
yeah,
meaning if you have expectations of a certain person, they're not expressed, that can create, tension between both because we're not really here to live up to other people's expectations. Even though you have a job responsibility, I get it. But if you can share those and you're talking about them openly and there's an expectation that you want to talk about, then there's an opportunity to negotiate, to chat, to figure out what's needed. If there's a new expectation, well, what becomes less of a priority? Like what kind of an agreement could we create so it works for both parties?
mm,
So the clear communication, I love you shared that.
yeah, and I think the one thing you can be absolutely certain about is if you haven't told me what your expectations are, I probably won't live up to them. So,
Right, yeah, it's
you know,
almost it's
it's
impossible.
kind of obvious. Well, you didn't live up to my
It's lucky.
expectations. I know I didn't tell you what they were, but,
Right,
there is an important point in there, which is there's a whole topic that you could probably do a whole 'nother podcast on around kind of performance management, but
right.
actually that's kind of the mechanics of it. The most important bit, which is behavioral based, is how you give coaching and feedback as a leader or as a peer, actually. So coaching and
Yeah,
feedback doesn't need to be down. It can be
right.
across and it can be up.
Feed
But,
forward?
the part of the training was what's the language that you use during coaching and feedback? Not to shy away from difficult conversations, but what is the best way to do those conversations framed in a positive manner? So, kind of, I like what you did in that meeting, Greg, but it would be even better if you did,
Right,
so the even better if bit is, it's a more positive way of going, well, you didn't do that very well, Greg. It's the
right.
same, it's the same piece of information, just presented in a slightly different way. And, you know, those conversations can be extremely hard and extremely uncomfortable. But if you've been given the tools and the language to at least do a little bit better, then again, it just adds to the overall sentiment within the organization. So
I love that. Where do you think, like, recognition factors in? Because I've read different articles saying that, you need to build up the trust bank with recognizing, employees in your team with, um, what they've done and accomplishments. And you need to say something positive. So it used to be 6. I think now they're saying it's 11 times before you've earned, the right. You've built up enough trust, to say
Mm.
something, to share some constructive criticism as well as you just shared it, right? So where do you think that factors in? Is that
I'm not for me, I'm not sure there's a number. I mean, there's no doubt that trust is earned and built over time. I think for me, certainly in my experience, it's the
yeah,
informal recognitions that are
right?
much more powerful. You know,
Mhm.
my motivation in my career, yes, it's always nice getting a bonus or a pay rise or something, but actually one of the reasons I never worked for myself was I actually like someone I work for saying, "Good job, Chris." I kind of thrive on that, and it motivated me. Um, my brother has his own company. I'm like, "Well, who tells you you do a good job?" You know?
Right.
So,
Hopefully his clients,
and well,
right?
yeah, exactly. But
Yeah,
you have to get it from other places. But I think
right.
I certainly did, and I certainly, um, kind of encouraged the leadership teams in the organization to, you know, give people recognition and reward frequently, but more informally, just a pat on the back, hand on the shoulder, whatever, um, it is really quite powerful at an individual basis. You've obviously framed it in, you know, financial reward if it needs be, or if people have gone beyond the call of duty, some small budget for, go take the family out for dinner or pay for a babysitter and go out with your wife or your husband, depending on, who's the one in work. And that can be so powerful, because it doesn't need to be, a big financial piece. The other one that goes back to the positive buzz piece is, how do you celebrate as a team? So we did a number of things through the organization. I think I spoke to you, in Rolls-Royce Canada, there's a repair and overhaul um, shop in Montreal, and as part of this high performance culture, everyone's kind of given this is the basis, and these are the foundations, and these are the behaviors. But actually, you can go work out how you implement it yourself. So it was local. So they used to do for the team who performed the best. They did like a Stanley Cup parade through the middle of the factory, with the forklift trucks, carrying the dragging the team behind them in a trailer with a and, the management team had bought a Stanley Cup. And, they just said, "Look, we're gonna shut down the factory for 15, 20 minutes, and we're doing a Stanley Cup parade through the factory of the team." And what that does is, A, it rewards the team who win it, but actually all the other guys and girls who are applauding and cheering, A, is positive buzz, but they're like, "Well, actually, I wanna be on the float, next month." So, those small things. We had like a Tour de France competition where someone got, if someone had done something really well, then they were awarded a yellow jersey. In Baker Hughes, we would give out culture awards, weekly and monthly for people demonstrating the right behaviors. And they were awarded a cocoa tree planted in Nicaragua, I think it was. So, we were our culture was basically planting, forests. So, and that really caught the imagination of people. So I think it's just find a way to celebrate and reward people. You can do it in innovative ways. So
Yeah.
innovation can be applied to engineering. It can be applied to everything. So, just innovate and think about it and give teams a bit of a free rein. How do you want to
Mm.
celebrate this next milestone?
I love that. It reminds me of I love the informal part of it too, because I think in a performance review, it doesn't always come across as probably authentic, right? Because you have to do it and it's your once
Yeah.
every 6 months or whatever it is, and that's the nature of it. And the way you're
There should
talking
be no
about it.
surprises in a performance review.
Right. Yes, thank you. That's like, when I would hire people, I would always say like, "Hey, we'd bring them into the team and I'd say one-on-one, like, we're really excited to have you here. And if at any point, something changes, like, please let me know something you're not happy with. Try to keep the doors open. It's a, smaller team than you've worked with in your career. But I've always said, like, if there's something that I'm not happy with, I will let you know, and if I decide to let you go, I promise you it will not be a surprise. We will have had conversations, tried to work things out, and then, both agreed it wasn't. And I worked with a client, a CEO, an amazing leader, and he was not a micromanager. He refused to micromanage. He knew that was not a good way to build your team and business and make a difference. And the only thing he requested of his managers was with their team that they would take out their team members once a month for coffee or lunch and just ask great questions, recognize who they are, and really listen to them. What is it that they need? How are things really going? Not a performance review, but a casual lunch and really get to know them was kind of his thing. Get to
Yeah.
know who they are as people, not just as team members. So I really love that. That was beautiful.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes particularly big organizations, they kind of need permission to do things differently.
Right.
So I always had one-on-ones, with my leadership team.
Mhm.
Every week I'd have a one-on-one with all of them, which was a big commitment of time. Bigger teams, I'd maybe do at least one person every 2 weeks. But if you do half an hour with 14 or 15, yeah, that's a fair chunk of the week already gone. But we started doing, rather than you coming to my office, I'll come to your office. Yeah, rather than me sitting in my throne room, and you can all come to me. I'll come to you because it makes me more visible as well because I'm out walking the patch, um, and actually then it started morphing into actually let's go for a walk, depending on what the weather was like. So let's do the one. It's half an hour. We're still going to be talking, but actually there's a bit of exercise. It's a different environment. And actually the conversations became a bit more freer and maybe a bit more honest. And so I think it's just permission. You don't have to do things. It's the way it's always been done. And another of the kind of Larry Sen culture change principles is kind of break some of those sacred cows. So what was the jaws of culture? So there's the really powerful piece of culture, which is, high performing teams and blah, blah, blah. But actually you can have the opposite, which is the jaws of culture, which is what are the things that stop you doing great stuff? It might be the bureaucracy, it might be the processes, it might be, the way we're laid out physically, so break some of those sacred cows as part of your culture change program to say, look, it is a bit different here next week than it was last week. And I think if you break some of those sacred cows, it just opens people up to actually we can do things a bit differently, even in a compliance based, safety critical, organization like Rolls-Royce. So, and Baker Hughes, same. Big culture change program in a highly regulated industry, but actually you can innovate with while still being compliant to those kind of those regulation and safety critical bits.
I love that, Chris. I'd love to know too, like, what other things block joy? Like, that's a great, I know there's a bureaucracy and, like you talked about the jaws of culture, but yeah, what are those other things that block joy in a company? And then I'd love to hear, more about how do you remove those blocks? How do you get through them? How do you address them? How do you deal with those sacred cows? I'd love to hear more about that. I think
Yeah,
that's a big part of it.
yeah, yeah. It's hard because there are some big things, but
Mhm.
there are some small things. So some of the examples are some of the processes that have been built up over time. You know, are there for very real reasons, but there are other bits of bureaucracy that actually aren't there. I remember having a capital scheme. It was, I don't know, £10 million, maybe £5 million, and it came to me for signature, and there was like 13 other signatures on the capital scheme before we got. So I'm like,
Wow.
well, what value am I adding? Because have I got to? Do I know something better that these 13 highly skilled people don't know because they've
Right.
all signed it? But actually, why are the 13? Why are there 14 people signing it? And you go, oh, it's what the procedure. It's what the procedure says. And you go, well, hold on, let's this is lean culture now. Is like, okay, let's go see. Let's get the procedure out and see what the procedure actually says. And what the procedure actually says is only two signatures required. But actually, over time, someone done a pro forma, and on this one, let's have Greg sign it. And then all of a sudden, Greg's on the pro forma, and you have to sign all of them. And all of a sudden, there's 14 signatures. So I think making sure you take the opportunities to, challenge the status quo for the things
I
that,
love that.
I always used to say to my teams, you tell me what's getting in the way of you being better. And I'll give you one. It's slightly apocryphal, but it's, I was walking through the office and I was doing a go look see. So I was going and seeing some teams and talking to them, and there was this one team who were in an incredibly pressurized situation. They were trying to get parts in for a new engine program. And I was saying, "Oh, tell me how it's going and show me what you're doing." And they had this big kind of whiteboard with all of this huge grid. And every day they sit and they go through this grid and they update the status. And they said, "We have to do this every day." And I said, "Well, is there any, what's frustrating you?" Just ask that question. What's getting in your way? And they said, "Well, we wanted to buy some tape up the grid because we just drawn the grid on, but every time we update the status and we rub it out, we rub the grid out. So we have to kind of redraw the grid every day." And I'm, well, that's just ludicrous. And yeah, this is big corporation. So it's, well, we went to the procurement team and they said we needed to 3-quote the tape. And, so it got a bit silly. So I want to talk to somebody, and we went and bought them some tape. And I then walked back down to the office and I gave them this, it's a special tape, it's thin, you know, and well, they were so pleased. And it showed that actually someone cared and was willing to listen and spend the time to say, "How can I make your day better?" Sometimes there's benefits of being at a level I could make it happen. But B, it saved them about half an hour a day of redrawing grids. And you just think when you're in that pressurized a situation, the last thing you want to be doing is something absolutely mundane and mind blowing, like drawing a grid on a whiteboard every day. I think just those small changes, and yes, if there are some big changes, tackle those as well. But sometimes those are not as easy to solve. So just
Mhm.
just show that things are different. So I think it's almost an impossible question to answer, which is what blocks joy, because there's potentially
Yeah.
everything, and there's always, particularly in big corporations, there's always admin and there's always the grind and the treadmill kind of stuff. But actually there's ways to minimize that. And so we spend a lot of time saying, how do we maximize engineers actually doing the engineering? Because that's really why you pay them. And how do we try to minimize it? And, it's a sawtooth. So we improve everything, it gets a bit better, and then slowly over time it all creeps back, and then you have to do it again. And so
Take a step
consistent,
back. Yeah.
continuous learning.
And I love how you started off by saying, the 12 signatures, like no one's questioned that because it is what it is. And, it
Yeah.
takes something, how do you take a step back? And I talk about this analogy in some of the offsites and retreats that I do. Sometimes that obstacle, it's like a brick wall. It feels like it's immovable. You can't go over, you can't go around it. But if you back up enough, you can see, wow, that it really isn't an infinity wall, like, that actually is only a small little wall, but when you're up close, there's no way around it or you're through it. When you back up, you're like, "Oh, okay, I can just go around," and you see things, from a different perspective, and I think that's important, whether it's listening to
I
your
did a
team members.
podcast. I did a
Yeah.
podcast a couple of years ago, and I apologize to that podcast because I'm going to use the same story because they asked me a question similar. And this was quite early in my career, and I was still, still, my hair was a different color than gray. And,
I thought it was
and
blonde,
I
Chris.
was given the target to deliver a new component in 9 months from a clean sheet
Mhm.
of paper to pasta stores. Never been done before. It was, kind of 50% of the time it normally took. So, yeah, so we kind of handpicked a team, and we said, how are we gonna do this? So we said, okay, we need a kind of a team area. We need to co-locate. We need the right people. I said, look, these men and women are going to be working ridiculous hours, So I want a fridge in the office. It'd been never been heard of, and I got the fridge. So and we put just soft drinks and water and some snacks. because people were going to be staying till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And the uproar of the other teams who saw the fridge and said, well, if you want to join the team and work, kind of 16-hour days, then feel free. You can use the fridge. but it was that breaking a kind of the unwritten rule of the organization to allow us to access the next level of high performance. And we achieved the target, which no one thought we'd do. And was it down to the fridge? No.
Oh,
Again, it was down to the intellect and attitude and energy of the people. But actually, just again, creating the environment which says, look, I'm expecting you to give, I'm asking you to give. So we're going to try and make the environment, and in this case, the physical environment, you know, a bit better.
right. I love that. And it does. It made a huge difference, right? It doesn't seem like a big deal, but I had a client. It was a software company, and the executive team, again, their systems, processes, structures, like what can we do to make things more efficient? And they decided that they were going to eliminate snacks. And so they like no more pop, no more water, no more snacks because one, they had to
Mm.
continue. Someone had to order it, someone had to store it, someone had to keep track of it. And they just didn't feel it was a good use of time or money. And then what happened was, I mean, you have all these programmers that are working those 16-hour days or longer. There's deadlines, they're doing their sprints, they're doing whatever. And they're like, they were depending on that granola bar and that Coke or whatever, Diet Coke at, midnight. It's one of those little perks that just said, hey, we see you, we appreciate you, and here's some, excuse me, here's some snacks. So, after they got the feedback, they realized it was a huge mistake. So they did, put
Mm.
it back. So the fridge got back in and the snacks made it back in. So,
Yeah, there you go.
well, well, Chris, for those listening to our conversation today, like, what do you hope they feel? What do you hope they get out of this?
It's okay to have fun in work.
All
Is
right.
probably the key message. And actually, in whether you've worked in teams that were successful or you've played in sports teams that were successful, in general, they're happy places. You see people smiling and you see people, enjoying each other's company. And that is it doesn't mean you need to all be best friends and all get on, but actually the behavior set that says, I trust that you're going to be doing the right thing. That if I see you doing something that is maybe not what I expect, I'm going to assume positive intention on your part. Because often you say, well, why the hell is Greg doing that? It's ridiculous. And then you go, well, Greg's not doing that because he wants to sabotage anything. He's not doing that because, he's doing it because he thinks it's the right thing to do. So understand the backstory, understand where the positive intention is coming from and see if there's a kind of a compromise or actually you completely change your mind because now you understand the perspective. But I think the key takeaway is, look, behaviors are absolutely critical in any culture. Individual behaviors, team behaviors, inter-team behaviors. And that's by focusing on that and making sure that the goals are set and the environment's right and the governance structure is right. You can achieve amazing things and you can achieve things that you didn't think were possible. And once you've done that, make sure you celebrate the successes. It's amazing how often, we go, well, we've got a milestone performance of 90, we're targeting 90% and we didn't we hit 89% and oh, doom and gloom and yeah, we missed it and what's gone wrong. And you go, hold on a second. We achieved 89% of all our milestones on time. Not where we wanted to be, but that is brilliant. So let's celebrate the 89 and then work out how we get above the target. So it's sometimes just a small shift in mindset. And remember to focus on the things that have been achieved. Don't just focus on the things that haven't. Because in any situation, most people will focus on the bit that hasn't been achieved for obvious reasons. You want to learn from it and you want to correct it, but make sure you do both.
I love that, Chris. I love the mindset. I mean, I look at group mindset as another definition for culture. And I was working with a few,
Yeah.
excuse me. I was working with a few. There were sister companies, three companies that were part of one, and there was a lot of internal conflict within each of those three companies and between the three companies. And I did one-on-one stakeholder interviews. I kind of figured out what was going on. We did a whole kind of analysis. And I remember when I had all 3 teams together, and this is after quite a few kind of individual workshops and smaller meetings. And when I had everyone together and I said, "Hey, everyone," I go, part of the workshop was I said, "Look around the room, and I want to ask you guys a question. If you were doing something or saying something that was having a negative impact on your team or your customers, would you want to hear about it?" And everyone's like, because I knew how much they cared, right? Everyone raised their hand. And I said, "So look around the room. I mean, you're basically giving each other permission to share that, and if someone does do that, give them the benefit of the doubt and let them know." Because there were so many, Chris, there's so many sidebar conversations. The culture was toxic. It was so negative, and it was really hard to listen to because I knew how much they cared, but they were having these sidebar conversations with people talking about so and so over there, and I was like, if you have something you wanna say, you wanna say it to them. Now there's different ways to say it, which is what we've talked
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
before. There's different ways to give feedback and, that's a whole other topic. But, I love that, mindset and just, shifting the way that people, think about things and giving them
Yeah.
an opportunity to think about it differently, different perspective.
I'm trying not to go through all the cultural concepts. Well, there's another couple again. There's one which is stay curious. So the experiential training is there's a profile of something and you have to work out what it is, and actually it's a wheelbarrow, but it doesn't look anything like a wheelbarrow. But it just says, don't stay curious and ask questions because actually your initial reaction to a set of data might not be the right. And if someone else is coming with a different position, just be curious about why they've got that position. And the other one is be aware of your filters. We all have filters from our upbringing, from our professional experience, from, Bob did that to me 6 months ago, so I'm not trusting Bob anymore. We all have those kind of filters. But if you're aware of them and make sure that it doesn't drive you down a wrong decision, so those kind of staying curious and being aware of your filters kind of combine. So I think again that making sure that just because someone is disagreeing with you or having a different perspective isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as it's treated in the right way. And actually the worst thing you can have is, as you say, the sidebar conversations about, and the worst thing is you go in a meeting, you think you've agreed something, and then the first thing people do is go out and says, well, we're not going to do that. You know, so you think a decision's been made, but it hasn't really because it's so, get it out on the table. And that's where, high performance culture isn't about happy clappy, everyone laughing. It can be, roll your sleeves up, hard, difficult, tense conversations, but at least you're all talking the same language.
I love that. Well, Chris, it's been such an awesome conversation. So great having you here. I'll leave your LinkedIn link in the comments too, so if people want to reach out to you. I'll provide that as well. And yeah, it's been a fantastic conversation. I think what stands out are lots of things that stand out, but for me is that, joy in leadership isn't softness, right? And it doesn't have to be play. It doesn't always have to be fun. And you can do great work and you can do serious work and still have fun and still enjoy what you do. So it's not about lowering standards. It's not about sacrificing performance. Like you said, it's about alignment. It's about trust. It's about truly caring and building an environment where people can bring their full authentic selves and humanity to work. So, yeah, I really want to thank you for, your decades of leadership, for sharing your energy, wisdom, and humor with us today. I think people who have worked with you, in career have been, I'm sure, grateful to be in your energy and your wisdom and the way that you lead and the way that you connect with people and the way that you treat people is really special. So, to everyone listening, if something Chris shared today resonated with you, please don't just nod and move on. Take that insight, convert it to action, apply it, have a courageous conversation, get to know one of your teammates at a deeper level, move from expectations into an agreement, remove a barrier for yourself or for your team because joy isn't accidental, it's intentional. So we'll see you next time on Joy Squared. Live with joy. Thanks for spending this time with us on Joy Squared, where joy multiplies and everything gets better. Remember, joy isn't just something you feel, it's something you create and it's something you pass on. If this conversation sparks something in you, share it because joy is contagious. What we're building here is bigger than a podcast. It's a reminder and a movement that how we live, work, and lead truly matters. Until next time, live with joy, lead with purpose, and never forget to have fun. Keep choosing JOY². And if you're enjoying the journey, we'd be grateful if you subscribe, like, and share JOY² so the ripple keeps spreading.